My name's Sasha Pete, and I'm joined by two fantastic individuals. Today, Nick Gates and Luke Crawford from HeadSafe Football. Welcome to this conversation.
Sasha, thanks for having us.
Yeah,
So,
really pleased to be here.
so today I would like you to educate us because I think we're about to have a very important conversation. And I'd really like those listening to share what they hear today far and wide because you're doing some important work, particularly around education. First, tell us a little bit about HeadSafe Football.
So Head Save Football came about, unfortunately, because my father, Bill, a professional footballer for Middlesbrough for 13 years, died from chronic traumatic encephalopathy. And 7 or 8 years ago, when we talked with him, he asked whether we could be part of protecting the next generation of players and, in effect, protecting the future of the game. And so Head Save Football, with the experience that we've got, has built from there. We've protected a lot of the older players, the 60, 70, 80-year-old players who have been diagnosed with GT football dementia. Now, over the last couple of years, with the amazing work of Lou, our education for young people has grown, and we've worked with a number of professional organizations in the UK, plus a lot of teachers, plus a lot of organizations. So our aim is to educate people and show them the science around repetitive head impacts.
Okay. And Lou, how did you become involved in HeadSafe Football?
So my background, I'm passionate about football myself as a player, as a parent, as a coach. And I've been an educator. I've been a PE teacher through the school system. So those two passions combined, and my involvement with a second charity to coaches across continents. So those two things combined meant that I was introduced to Head Safe Football, and I just jumped at the chance to be involved because I just want to protect the players. I want to protect the game. And I don't think it's a complicated thing to do. So I'm really passionate about our cause.
Okay, brilliant. So when I became when Ian Greener, who's a legend here in our coaching ranks, put me on to you, I almost felt naive about my own knowledge because I'm a junior coach, and so walk me through what CTE is because most of us don't know or don't understand. What is it?
That's you, Lou.
Sorry. Okay, so CTE is a neurodegenerative disease. Um, it presents with symptoms of dementia, such as memory loss, confusion, aggression. The way that it's caused is the repetitive head impacts create stretching of the brain when the brain ricochets in its skull, and that releases something called tau protein. Now, that release can happen in young people. That's when we hit our head. That's when we headed the ball. Okay, but over the years, that tau protein that's released starts to clump, and these clumps of tau protein, they inhibit the messages across the brain and therefore inhibit the function of the brain. So the damage is done when the people are young, when they're playing football, but the symptoms start later. Symptoms have started as young as 30s, but typically they start more likely late 40s, 50s. And it might begin with just simple memory loss, but it is a neurodegenerative disease. So there's no cure for this, and it
Mhm.
gets worse and worse. And that's the sad fact, is that, there is no way out. And of course, the families and loved ones have to support these individuals and experience the trauma of a degenerative disease.
Mm, mm. And so what so obviously this affects so head trauma affects anyone who's hit in the head, but this is something. So we often think of like boxers who constantly get punched in the head, um, or the big concussion when we get knocked out. That's like severe head trauma. We get knocked out. We know that there's an injury, and so there are protocols to deal with that, like the severe hit. But what you're talking about is the simple and maybe even the benign. Um, so walk me through, like, what's the difference between the average person and, let's say, somebody who plays football? What are the risks?
Okay. So just to clarify, any head injury is going to have this effect. So the research actually started back with boxing pugilistica, military veterans, victims of domestic violence. So that's where the research started. Um, Within the reason we're being specific to football is that, as you've said, when there's a concussion or a car crash, for example, when there's a big brain trauma, there are symptoms and there are protocols and you can treat those. When it comes to the minor head knocks, the subconcussive head knocks that are repetitive over time, which we do in football all the time when we head the ball, it doesn't necessarily hurt. We don't necessarily think we're doing any damage, but because of the nature of our sport, we do that thousands and thousands of times over our playing life. And that's the issue we're looking to address as a charity, because it's like an unknown problem and it's an unfelt problem until, of course, those symptoms of dementia start to arrive in the 40s and 50s, and by then it's too late. So it's this cumulative frequency of force over a lifetime of playing. That's what we're looking to educate and address.
There are some famous past Socceroos that we know who have died from this disease. Like, I'll just hopefully it's okay to drop some names, but I think Manfred Schaefer had this problem because, but the thought was because the ball was really heavy. The old heavy ball. Talk to me, like, what's happening now? So in the past, old heavy balls, waterlogged. Now, new modern balls, supposedly lighter in weight. What is the research showing today?
So it's the biggest myth, and it's what everybody uses to say it's not a problem today. The easiest way to look at it is to find the rules of how much a football must weigh in order to be an official football. And it's been the same weight for over 100 years. So the ball we're using today weighs the same as the ball that was used in the 60s and the 70s, etc. The argument is that, particularly in England, where we're talking from, that this leather ball got wet and therefore it was heavier. Because it was wet and heavier, it went slower. And so today's ball, unfortunately, the ball that was advertised for the World Cup was advertised as the fastest moving ball in history. So now you have a ball that weighs the same as it has always weighed from the 50s, 60s, etc., but it's moving through the air faster. So the impact on the brain, we argue with, is at least as dangerous. I argue it's more dangerous. And I liken it to a heavyweight boxer's punch. If they punch you at 10 miles an hour, it hurts. It causes a bit of damage. If they punch you at 50 miles an hour, that punch is more, the brain ricochets even more. So today's ball is at least equally as dangerous, and we would argue more dangerous.
Okay. And so what are some of the other myths that present when it comes to that people
That
who?
there's less heading in today's game. That's
Okay.
the next big myth. When the rules were changed and goalkeepers were no longer to take back pass in the hands, there's less kicks out of the hands now from goalkeepers. So people would argue that there's less heading in the game. Unfortunately, as we've done the research and a number of major newspapers have done this, they're finding that there's more heading in the game at the professional level than ever before, because the game's faster, there's more of everything. So even playing out from the back, if you watch closely, round about the sixth pass goes long, either down the line or cross field, or it gives the goalkeeper and the goalkeeper knocks it long from the ground. So there's one of the big myths. The other one is that the coaches say they don't do any heading in training. And I agree, there's less of the drills of heading than there's been before. The problem is kids are playing more football than ever. They're starting younger than ever before. They're in academies very young. They're playing 3-4 times a week with their club teams, with training and games. They're playing in schools. They're playing others. So they're actually having more head impacts than ever before. And so those are the big things that we want people to be aware of. And our research has shown that kids doing just 3 or 4 head impacts a night, because they're playing in schools, they're playing for the club teams, they're playing other sports, etc. By the time they're 16, they may have had around about 15,000 headers in their lives. And so by not doing any heading drills, as coaches would say, this is how much heading is still happening for young people. And that's the age where the brain is the least formed. It's the most dangerous time in there because the brain hasn't developed in the skull as it would do. Now, there's never a safe time to have a head impact, but it's more dangerous as a child. And, unfortunately, everything we do is science-based, and the science is showing now that young people, they've done autopsies on brains of young people who've committed suicide, and they're seeing CTE as young as 18 in the brains and things like that. So it is getting, it is science-based, everything we talk about.
So
another myth we have to dispel is this concept that if you use the right technique, if we coach the right technique for heading, we'll protect the brain. And that's one I come across quite a lot when I'm working with coaches specifically. Now, the issue with the damage we're talking about is it's actually the ricocheting of the brain within the skull. So any head impact is going to result in that. You can't wear a helmet to protect yourself. You can't change your technique to protect yourself. Any impact on any area of the head is going to cause this. It's called contre-coup. It's going to cause this experience of ricocheting inside the brain. And with the ricochet, you get damage at both sides, you see, because it hits both sides of your skull. So, yeah, that's another myth that we have to dispel.
So is there any difference between men and women?
Okay. Well, this is where the science does need to catch up. Obviously, women's football, soccer, is growing as a sport exponentially. In the UK, it's now professional. It's now shown on TV. We've got the role models. The participation rates of young girls are booming, and the research hasn't able to be there because they haven't had the individuals to do the research on. So there is a big lacking gap in the gender information. However, there's more information out there when it comes to women and concussions. And what we do know from that research is that women are more susceptible to experience a concussion. Women, on average, take 2 days longer to recover from a concussion. And the theories are, is this related to the diameter of the axon of the neurons? Is it that the women's cells are more fragile and more vulnerable? There are theories about menstrual cycle and could hormones affect things. There are theories about neck strength and the muscles to support the head. So there are lots of different potential theories out there. Sadly, at the moment, we don't have the research because professional women footballers aren't yet in their 60s and 70s to then, have the incidence rates of CTE. The first female female athlete to be diagnosed with CTE was actually an Australian, Heather. I'm really sorry, I'm going to forget her last name, but she did Aussie rules football. She did martial arts and boxing, and she was a military veteran as well. And sadly, she died at the age of 28. And they donated her brain bank, and she was diagnosed with CTE. And she was the first woman globally that was diagnosed with CTE from contact sports.
And so the reason why we know this exists is because we can measure it after the fact. When the autopsy, we can actually see the proteins build or measure. So excuse my ignorance, but this is physically observable fact, and we're linking the brain damage to the history of what that person had. So, Nick, if we could just make it personal. So, was Dad a boxer? Did he I don't know, did he scrap in the schoolyard, or did he just
so this is where my dad is actually almost the perfect person to study. He didn't drink, he didn't smoke, he was incredibly healthy from the neck down. He was never concussed. And so the only possible logic is that the contacts to his brain came from heading the ball. And so there was nothing else in there that we can. And again, this is all part of the autopsy. He was passionate that he wanted his brain donated. It's not just that Willie Stewart, who did the biggest study of footballers with CTE, that's found that footballers are 3.5 times more likely to have neurodegenerative disease than the general population. But Willie asked all these questions as well, because we have to look at lifestyle on there. But the logic is that the only thing that would have caused the repetitive head impacts would be heading. There's nothing else in his life. So yeah, he was an incredibly healthy person until the symptoms of CTE really kicked in.
Okay. And so walk me.
And the other thing on that, I think, Sasha, is that he didn't head a football after the age of 29. His last game was a day before his 30th birthday. He played against Leeds in his testimonial. It was called the Match of Champions. And from that game, it was a testimonial game, a sold-out Ayresome Park at Middlesbrough. Middlesbrough had won the second division. Leeds had won the first division. Jack Charlton was the manager of Middlesbrough, who'd had a career at Leeds. So it was a fun night. It was also the night I carried the Middlesbrough trophy around the stadium, and round the Middlesbrough fans, everyone's cheering, and round the Leeds fans, they're throwing coins at me. So I made more money as a 9-year-old than any other day in history. But from that night, of the players who have died from that game, 60% of them have died from some sort of brain injury disease. And so from the World Cup team of 1966 in England, nearly 60% of those players have died from a brain disease. Now, this is where it's an easy out for people. Going into the medical world, these players were diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, etc. So it was clumped in. So people saying, well, my nana has dementia and she never played football, or my mother had dementia, or what would have happened, we're certain, and I'll say that in my opinion, I'm certain, that had those brains been examined, they would have shown CTE. But medically, it gets grouped into this, well, everyone has dementia and dementia is growing, so why is it football? That's the biggest problem with the CTE diagnosis at the moment, is you have to ask somebody to donate the brain. And in England, 3 weeks ago, we did a big game with neuroscientists and what have you, and we announced the first non-professional footballer playing non-league football who donated the brain to the brain bank, and was shown that he died from CTE. So yeah, that's one of the biggest challenges, is because people think dementia exists everywhere, which it does, but the CTE can only be seen in an autopsy. And with my dad, it was the most severe CTE. From there, the tau proteins, the damage was so great.
And to add to that, Nick, at that very event, we had a GP there who said, well, I didn't know anything about CTE until today. So it's also about, educating, informing medical professionals to ask, do you play contact sports? If someone comes in to a GP presenting with symptoms of dementia, do you smoke? Do you drink? Do you play contact sports? That should be a standard question, because ultimately we need to build a picture through data, through medical data, of the prevalence of CTE, to be able to then make a difference. We are guided by science, we're driven by science, so we need the science to catch up and provide the information.
Okay. So now at this point, everybody will be thinking, so do you want to change the rules of the game, or what is it that you want to occur from here? Because I think most people want to do the right thing. How can everybody help?
So our campaign is, in effect, it's think head safe, reduce heading in training. Now, Lou and I are both active coaches. And when I began this journey more than 20 years ago in America, I was certain that I never did heading with my young players. And then I started looking at the practice sessions and seeing, well, we in the warm-up, there was heading involved in there. In this bit of fun game, there was heading involved in there. When I did set pieces, there was heading involved. When we played head tennis, there was heading involved. And suddenly it was in front of me. And I think we talked about Ian Greener. Ian's become aware of his training patterns now and thinking, I didn't think of it like that because I didn't ever do any traditional training for heading, but I was ignoring all the heading that was happening just in my practice session. So for us, we know that about 90% of the heading that players have come in training. So let's reduce it there. Similar to smoking. If you smoke one cigarette a day all your life, you might get lung cancer. If you smoke 50 cigarettes a day all your life, you're pretty certain you're going to get lung cancer. So for us, we want to use the science to say, here's the first step is let's reduce heading in training. And we can talk about some of the guidelines already in place. So in Scotland, for instance, the day before and the day after a game, players are not allowed to head the ball. The FA have guidelines in the UK now. There's no heading at all under 9, which will progress through to under 12 in training or in games. And they recommend how many headers per week. The Premier League have a rule that players are only supposed to have 10 high velocity headers per week in training. That's a guideline. It's in there. So those are the things that we would love to see happen in Australia. And it's a safeguarding thing for the young person. If you were to say that child was getting hit on the head 25 times a week by their parent, someone would come in on safeguarding and protect the child. That's what perhaps we have to look at in football. And it's common sense. It's not difficult to do. It's just as a coaches, we have to be a little bit more thoughtful on our practice sessions.
Nick and I joined an international webinar for medics within football. And on that call, we learned that there are 210 national FAs globally, and less than 10% of those have any guidance about heading. So, that alone makes you say, well, hold on, let's just get something in place. Let's just raise awareness. I think one of the issues with the guidance in the UK is that we have it, but it's not part of coach CPD to know that it exists. So it's there, but it's not really being used. And also it's quite difficult to implement because I can't count if Bobby's done 10 and Joe's done 9, Pete's done 7. As a coach, I can't keep that in my head. And so actually, I think all we need to do is raise an awareness that if you head the ball a lot, we don't need to put a number on it. If you head the ball a lot, it's bad for you. And so can we just have some, agency as a player to say, actually, I had a really heavy day with heading in my match yesterday, so I won't do any today. And I think we have to involve the players in the conversation as well as the coaches, because it's good to educate coaches. Of course, we have to start somewhere, but players need to also be aware and take, some responsibility for the amount of headers that they're doing as well.
Okay. Hopefully this conversation.
Sorry, I was going to say I've changed, Sasha, that I ask questions now when players come in. You know how we always ask, how's your hamstring? How's your knee? How's your ankle? I now ask, how's your brain? And we start to have that conversation. And if they say, yeah, my head hurts today, chances are it's lack of sleep or stress from school or lack of hydration or any of those things. But at least we're talking about it now and treating it at least as seriously as we treat a hamstring, an ankle, or a knee.
Hopefully this conversation can be spread far and wide so that people start raising awareness. Just to start thinking about the amount of heading we do at training. So I want to ask some dumb questions if I could. So I'm thinking if the ball's been played cleared long from the back and it's traveled 40, 50 yards, okay, the impact of a defender winning that ball is going to be greater than a ball being tossed and a tap back mimicking a throw in. So is that fair to assume?
Yeah, definitely. A ball that travels over a third of a football pitch is going to be traveling at a higher velocity, and therefore the impact forces will be greater.
Okay. So that ball being cleared, let's say from that goes long after it's on the 18 and gets cleared to the halfway line, and the defender comes up, clears it, wins it back, is potentially worse than the ball that's come in from the corner. Let's say from a corner or similar. Are we talking
similar? I would put corners as similar because they're getting whipped in at such speed.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the speed of the ball at a corner, they travel very, very fast. But I think the concept that not all headers have the same impact forces
Okay.
is true. I think that the risk of going down that road of, like, as the Premier League have said, only 10 high force headers, that's their guidance a week. The risk there is, how can you possibly, as a coach or as a player, kind of go, well, that was a high force, that was a medium force, that was a low force. It's really hard to assess the forces and the impacts. But what we can say is, I definitely did a lot of heading. I'm a central defender. My team were up against it. It was a defensive game yesterday. I didn't come off as a sub. I played 90 minutes and I headed the ball a lot. I can't tell you how many. It could have been 12, it could have been 17, it might have been 30. I don't know, because I don't play football counting my headers.
Yeah.
I should be concentrating on the game. But I know I had a heavy day of headers. And so I need to recognize that as a player, and probably the coach should be able to recognize that as well and say, do you know what? Have a rest day the next day. Not necessarily a rest from football, but a rest for your head.
Okay.
No heading. And this is where I do like the guidance from the Scottish FA. It's no heading at all the day before, the day after a match. It's so simple. It's black
Hmm.
and white. You can't get this wrong or right. And yet it will protect players. So I really like the Scottish guidance.
So
And I
this is
think,
really
Sasha, I
about
think,
risk mitigation. So what we're trying
yeah.
to do is risk mitigate in order to protect the entire footballing community so
Yeah.
that hopefully in a generation's time, we've got less CTE in the general public, less dementia, less brain disease, less death from brain disease. And
So we think that the calculations for the professional players and the senior non-league players, there's at least 30 years of the problem because these players are already in their 40s, etc. So there's no way around that. It's been roughly calculated. It would cost for care, support, etc. Because all of these players need full-time care. Once CTE moves through its pathway, it's going to cost more than £1 billion. That we had a football match 2 years ago called the £1 billion game, where we played where you could only head the ball in the penalty area to see if the game changed in any way, shape, or form, and then you couldn't head the ball at all. And this was a former professional, so it was with high top athletes who are good players, and it was to emphasize that it's not just a couple of people. The problem is £1 billion, and I think that's sort of the problem you're going to face in Australia. Is you've got the Aussie rules, you've got rugby league, etc., and football is the cost of care. And as I say, we were probably the greatest thing I'll ever do in my life is the last 7 years be full-time care for my dad. It tests everything about you. It's the hardest thing I've ever done. It's the most rewarding thing. It's his 1 year anniversary of his death on Monday. But I was very fortunate that my lifestyle allowed me to be there as a support thing from there. So that's the seriousness. It's not CTE is not something where in later life people say, he couldn't remember where his keys were. A lot of players now, old players, mood swings, aggression, violence, suicidal thoughts. And so I think people have to see it a little bit differently than just simply, oh, he's a little bit forgetful. It's the most brutal, brutal disease I can imagine anyone having to go through. And if common sense can say, let's reduce it in training, that's got to be good. I think just on the heading side as well, the long ball, the force is by that ball being kicked by a bouncing ball. You often go and you generate the velocity on the ball with your own neck and your brain. So there's still that ricochet. If a ball's bouncing in the thing, you think it's just a gentle header, but your brain is ricocheting. And so there's no real safe headers. And as Lewis said, we talk about the cumulative effects, the cumulative force built up over time. If there's 20,000 headers versus 5,000 headers, it has to be better. It has to
okay.
be good.
You see, I almost feel a little bit silly because, as a recovery, we'd play things like football tennis or soccer
Yeah.
tennis. And you think, the ball's just going over the net and, the boys are having fun or the girls are having fun. But, there's probably a header there every third or fourth ball.
So
And
here's what
sometimes it's just a,
some really cool things. One of the professional football clubs we worked with, they decided that for every point there could only be one header from a player. So they just made that as a really cool thing and reduced it. Something like 75% of headers were taken out, but the game. I love head tennis. I played weeks and weeks and weeks with my dad. He was obviously much better than me, and we had so much fun. It's a game that can be played, but they just imposed this one change. And obviously, it made people more skillful. They had to control the chess. They had to do it. So it's not getting rid of those things. It's just being a little bit more imaginative. We have a curriculum that can be done on the field where we can talk about the brain with the players and show them what happens and things like that. And it's fun and it's how they learn best. And so when we're in Australia, we'll be doing sessions on the field with players. And it helps coaches and players talk about their brains. But you're exactly right. It's just, again, it's common sense. We're only talking common sense stuff of looking at a game saying, well, how would we change that? I think Lou has a really good phrase. Often we do training and it's a lot of repetition. And Lou's phrase is make every header count. And so don't waste any. If we're going to do, instead of 10 repetitions, do one or two and make them perfect. Make them as you would do in the game if it's a set piece. Don't do 10 or 20 set pieces. Do one or two set pieces. And those sorts of things are just, I think, common sense. And I think coaches have a responsibility to protect their players, to safeguard them by not doing too many head impacts.
Okay. I think when it's an uncontested situation and you're learning to head, there are lighter balls you can use. There are sponge balls. There are a lot of the time when it's an uncontested situation, it's really about, where is your body position in the right place? Have you anticipated the flight of the ball? And so you could simply catch the ball. You've still done 90% of the learning without the impact. And then if you're going to let kids head the ball in training, or adults, make sure it's because the corner's coming in and it's contested and it's a situation that you can't manufacture in any other way. And that way it's a really valuable learning experience, and that impact was worth having. And I think that's the message. And we have a partner called Rizzle who do virtual reality headwear. And in virtual reality, you can do a heading game. You're still practicing where you get your body. You're still anticipating the flight of the ball. You're actually heading the ball, but there's no impact at all. So those are the kind of little tweaks that we can make in training. I've spoken with coaches about, have you ever done patterns of play from short corners with your kids? No. All they know is you put the ball down in the corner and you kick it into the box. Okay, well, if you've never given them another option, that's what they're going to do every single time. But if you give them 3 or 4 different patterns of play from a corner, and they know that they can whip it into the box, they've now got choice. And I think choice is one of the most important things. I think a lot of grassroots kids, they see the ball coming to them from the air. It's coming in the air, so I have to head it. Well, is it contested? Is somebody else trying to get that ball? Or do you have time to take it on your chest, get it down to your feet and play? And actually, we're more likely to keep possession as a team. I think quite often kids head the ball, it goes out, and we've lost possession and you've had a head impact. So, we're not trying to remove heading. I think there is a time and place for heading, but we can reduce it in training and we can give players choice.
Okay. So this is really good. So it's about, so we talked about, we talked about providing options, let's say from set piece, from corners, allowing players to play the short corner and being able to create and score goals via effectively playing short and trying to progress and score goals. So that idea is valuable, and we want to score goals that way. The idea about playing soccer tennis but only having one head from one portion of the team, you might have 6 or 8 or 10 people on a side, and 6 and 8, 10 on the other side, and you're heading the ball, and only one person has the header per point. These are simple ideas that we can implement. So we're not stopping the game. We're still having the same fun, recovery, let's say, for soccer tennis, or we're adding other ideas for coaches to try and manipulate how to score goals from corners, by sending 2 players out or 3 players out to try and progress the ball and shoot a goal. You were talking about coming out to Australia. So walk me through when are you guys coming out, and hopefully we can generate some interest to. I understand that you're going to be in Australia. First, walk me through when are you going to be here?
So we flipped the coin and I won. So I get to come to Australia. Lou is going to Uganda tomorrow and doing Head Safe in Uganda. So I think we're both quite happy on what happened. Lou's never been to Africa and worked there, and I haven't been to Australia for 20 years. So I'm coming the middle of November. We're working with PE. There's a PE teacher conference. Lou, what's the name of the conference?
ACHPER, ACHPER, ACHPER.
And so we're doing one session each day at that conference, and I think there's 2,000 PE teachers are involved in that weekend. And then with Ian, yourself, and Andrew, we're just booking in sessions, either coaches sessions where I can come and talk to the coaches and just explain some of the myths and facts and some of the science behind the heading stuff. We're available. I'm available to do sessions on field with the kids to get them talking about their brain for the first time and how it comes in. Where our program is unique is we can do it through play. And some of the things that we've seen are quite strange. We're working with some of the professional teams. I finished one session and one of the academy players came up and said, Nick, I've actually been to have MRI of my brain because I'm getting so many headaches and things like that, and hadn't told their sports scientists. This isn't a professional team because of the stigma of talking about your brain. And so what we want is to run sessions where teachers, coaches, and players feel comfortable to talk about it in the same way as they would talk about any other part of their body used as an athlete. The one big thing that we emphasize is you can get a new heart, you can get a new knee, you can get new toes, ankles, everything can be put into place now with science. You can't get a new brain. And so that's the one that we've got to make, as I have said, at least as equal to hamstrings and knees. I think we've got to treat the brain more importantly than the other parts of the body. And right now we treat it less. We just say, get on with it. You've got a headache, play through the pain. It's break through that stigma. So that's available really the last 2 weeks of November. I'll be wherever it is needed and working very closely with Ian Greener to do presentations.
So I think Ian said that we've picked two venues. So one venue just to let the Victorian public know we're going to be at Nuttawading. Nuttawading is obviously based in the east side of Victoria, and the other club is in the west, which is the club that my boyhood club, which is Western Suburbs. So we'll finalise those dates and invite the general public in, and we'll obviously get our coaches in and invite all the surrounding coaches from all clubs to come in and be part of that coach education. And then maybe we can see how it's implemented in under 10 or under 11 side. So we can see how do we make it fun for the kids, and obviously teach them the art of heading. So we're not saying we're going to remove it, but obviously limit the force and the amount of heading that occurs to protect them.
What Head Safe Football does very well is we engage with all stakeholders. So we've got we can talk with sports scientists, coaches, players, parents, club presidents, organizers, so they understand. We've just a brand new club in the northeast in England, a group called Killingworth, have now implemented. They've become a Head Safe club, and so all parts. So they put it all the way through the age groups. They're following the guidelines. They're making certain the kids are aware that their brain is important, and so we're talking about it more. As I say, Lou has worked with community trusts. We're working with foundations, etc. By just giving the education, coaches, parents, etc., they change their behavior. It's not that they don't want to do that, they just didn't know. That's
Mm.
the big part of it. And now just by sharing the information, and we're not doom and gloom. Lou and I love football. It's been massive parts of our lives. We want to make certain that every child has the opportunity to play, but there's a little bit of common sense. The last piece on that is certainly that we have seen a growth now of club welfare officers and safeguarding people in the clubs. They're feeling it's their role to be part of this, that they should be in the discussion. They should be part of it because it is safeguarding. If we're doing something that the science is saying has detrimental effects on children's brains, the safeguarding officer and the club welfare officer need to be part of the discussion so they can help and guide the coaches, work with the parents. So all stakeholders must be involved for this to be successful.
Mm, mm, mm. But it starts obviously by having a conversation. So, um, and I'm better for it. I personally will do my best to try and modify my actions and do my little part for all the young kids that I coach, all the way up to the adults that I coach. So, to make every header count. Because the sad fact is, if you know anyone who suffered severe dementia, it's a it's a taxing disease. It's the you know, like I've had family members who have had the dementia and who are undergoing, getting progressively worse. It's tough, right? It's a tough disease to deal with. Um,
Mm.
and anything that we can help the next generation get better, hopefully we're going to be wiser for it.
There was some interesting stuff as I went through the journey with my dad towards the end when he was in a wheelchair and it was difficult to have conversation. If I threw a ball to him, his brain could still react. He could still catch. He could still hit. And one day I went in with a sponge ball and I threw the ball. Gatesy, catch this, and he headed it. And I said, "Oh well," because my father was my best friend as well. So I said, "Gatesy, don't head the ball." And he had a little grin on his face. And I'm like, "But that's caused all the problems." And I threw the next one, and he headed it again. And the ball could bring him back to life. So sport is an amazing thing that as he as many memories were wiped clean from his brain, I could still talk to him and say, "Who was the best player you ever played against?" And he'd
Yes.
go, George Best. And those things were still there. But as you go through this journey, the memories disappear and you can create moments. But every night you go to bed and you want to cry.
Mm,
Because the caring is you literally see the light. My mum talks about the light went out in his eyes.
mm,
And so I think people really need to know it is the most brutal disease, I think, out there because we know there's no cure. There's nothing you can do. It's going to get worse and worse. We used to talk about every 3 months, we just got used to it and think, we're okay, we're good, we're good. And then we'd wake up and there'd be something new. There'll be something there. So this is, again, part of his legacy, the Bill Gates legacy, to be part of the journey for the next generation of footballers, just to keep them safer, for their aware. My dad also said when we talked to him towards the end of his life, would he have still been a footballer if he'd known now? And he was the first 50-pound teenager in Middlesbrough. He played, captain of England youth, all of these great things, played at Old Trafford, 350 odd games for Middlesbrough. And he was unmovable and saying, no, I wouldn't. If I'd known, I would have done it so differently. And so
mm,
that's what we want, is that players have the choice, as Lou said at the beginning, that they understand their brain. They can just say to the coach, actually, coach, I've headed it 15 times tonight. And the coach goes, yeah, perfect. We're not going to, the stigma is now we understand the brain is very, very important. So I can change the next things you have to do tonight and things like that.
yeah, brilliant. Well, I want to thank you for the work that you do within HeadSafe Football. Nick, I look forward to meeting you in person when you come down to Australia.
I'll play your head tennis, but with only one header per point.
Yes, yeah. So we're going to have to bring out
See,
all the other body parts
yes,
and
if
see
I've got any.
the shoulders. Yeah, so the shoulders and knees and how good. Yeah, fantastic. Well, thank you so much to you both for raising awareness for the Australian coaches. And I encourage all Australian coaches to share this podcast far and wide to your players, your parents, and most importantly, to anyone else who you think will help the next generation of footballers protect their brain.
And if they want to, go to Head Safe Football, Google us, and they can find many stories, many articles, our webpage, etc., Facebook, Instagram. They can see the work, and maybe they say, "We'd like to know about that," and get in touch with us. And we will happily send our resources across. It's all free resources that we'll share. And so that would be fantastic. We'd love to hear from lots of people.
So just calling out that website, it's headsafefootball.org.uk.
And the email, if anyone would like to email us, Sasha, it's hello@headsafefootball.org.uk.
Brilliant. Well, so hello@headsafefootball.org.uk. Thank you very much, guys, for this conversation, and may we raise awareness for heading in football.
Thanks very
Thanks,
much.
Sasha. See you soon.